Daddy was born 3 days after the full moon in November of 1934 in Kanpur, India. To be honest, we don't know his exact day of birth, but we've always celebrated it on November 20th. He was one of 8 brothers and sisters and the last remaining of all his siblings until just 11 days ago. His father, my Dadaji, worked at the Ganesh flour mills in Kanpur, and it had always been assumed that Dad would stay in Kanpur and follow in his footsteps. To everyone but Dad, of course. Dad's mother, my Dadi, would tell everyone that he would pack his suitcase when he was a kid and say, "I'm going to Germany." Now, I'd like to point out here that going to Germany was a rather strange dream for a child of color to have in the early 1940s. But Dad had read somewhere that many of the world's top engineers were coming out of Germany, and somehow it stuck. When Dad informed Dadaji in the mid-1950s that he did in fact plan on studying engineering in Aachen, Germany, and requested his blessings in addition to the signatures required for travel and study, it did not go over very well, and sadly my Dadaji did not provide either. In fact, he hired a Panditji to tell my dad that if he left India to study abroad, he would meet with disaster on his travels to Germany and drown at sea. So naturally, Dad took a boat to Germany and left India. It's hard to comprehend the courage it must have taken, to travel across the seas alone, barely touching his 20s, during the 1950s, without family support. In terms of following his dreams against all adversity, Dad was an inspiration to many and a trailblazer for us all. My Sanjay Dada from Mumbai, Dad's nephew, beautifully articulated the long-lasting impact of that decision by Daddy last week, saying this about him. Chacha was the first to study and live abroad. What he did opened the minds of generations to follow. And now, over 20 people from the family have gone on to study, work, and live overseas. I can proudly say that the credit goes to Chacha only to have opened the mindset of the Kanpur clan to the world outside of India, and we thank him for it. In Germany, Dad had the great fortune of meeting Marlene and Joseph Bodden, who without an ounce of prejudice in their heart, welcomed Daddy like a family member, teaching him how to speak German fluently and showing him the love and support of a true sister and brother, remaining his lifelong best friends to the end. Our Tante Marlene passed away just last month, and Joseph, our uncle, many years ago, and I'm sure they're having a grand German bratwurst time in the heavens today. Daddy got his degree and then his master's in engineering from the University in Aachen, Germany. When he returned to India many years later, after many years of study, he arrived back home with little more than he had left with. The only item of note was this one gold ring that I've worn every day for years now and will continue to wear until my time on earth has come and I can pass it on to Ishan. What great fortune Dad had to find the Boddens in Germany, but it was just the start of a series of major lottery wins in his life. The biggest, of course, meeting our incredible mother, who Daddy asked on their first meeting, "Rani, pan khaogi?" Translated into, "Will you have some pan, my queen?" Now, I think it's a pretty forward thing to call a girl a queen on a first date in 2022, let alone January of 1969. But Dad had, as the kids would call it today, game. And it seems an instant sense of how to woo Nina Mathur. This one. Yeah. Mum described her pan order to me this week as somewhat detailed. And as much as I love my mother, when she described it to me, it sounded, well, like the sign of potentially, let's say, a high-maintenance woman. A little sweet on top, a little less sweet inside, only if it's wrapped in this particular leaf from a particular region, and so forth. Anyhow, Dad was hooked. He asked her at the end of their first meeting, "Tum haan kahogi na?" You will say yes, won't you? Mum was not yet so sure. This was on Thursday, January 16th, 1969. They met again a few days later, Mom had some more pan, and apparently that sealed the deal because they were married on January 22nd, 1969, less than a week from the first time they had set eyes on each other. Though I'm sure we can all agree, Dad was certainly easy on the eyes. Within a week of the wedding, Mom had flown to Germany with Dad and then onwards to Sept-Îles, Quebec, to their new home. It was minus 45 with wind chill factor the day they got to Sept-Îles. I can't imagine what Mom must have been going through, having just married a stranger and moving halfway across the world, welcomed by the coldest and darkest of winters, all in less than a fortnight. When she got home, Dad told her, "Nina, I want you to be happy, and I could care less what people think. If you don't find happiness here, please go home in a few months and I will take the blame. But of course, I want you to stay." Mom has often told us it was the most decent thing anyone has ever said to her. And of course, she stayed forever. Dad's greatest joy, my sister Charu, joined them in April of 1970. Daddy, who used to smoke 2 packs a day, gave up cold turkey the day Mom told him she was pregnant. The first of countless selfless acts he would commit to for the safety, happiness, and well-being of his children. Just 3 months after Charu was born, Dad called home from work to see how Mom was. And when Mom asked in return, he said, "Nina, there's nothing to worry about, but my back hurts slightly and they're taking me to the hospital as a precaution. But you stay with Charu, and Nina, there is no need to come." Of course, Mom rushed to the hospital. And when she arrived and asked how he was, Daddy simply said, "I am okay." Only after some serious grilling did he reluctantly admit that he had no feeling from the waist down. I'm not making this up. It's no exaggeration. Dad was paralyzed, yet he was more concerned about upsetting Mom, so he didn't want to tell her right away. I'm not really sure what his plan was here, but what a man. It took Dad over a year to learn how to walk again properly, and many more years before he recovered further. And to his dying day, he had no feeling or sensation in his feet. Dad was one of the lucky few who do have some recovery from Guillain-Barré syndrome. And when the doctors told him in those early days that in all likelihood he would never walk again, he worried that he may not be able to sufficiently provide for Mom and Charu, and told Mom again, "Nina, I would understand if you need to leave me." And Mom stayed. Jesus, Nina, take a hint. I kid, of course. Daddy adored Mummy. Years later, when I started dating, he asked me what I was looking for in a partner, and I fumbled my response. When I asked him what he had looked for in return, he said, well, she had to be funny and talented and loving and love to cook and maybe slightly plump. I was like, slightly plump? He was just describing Mom. It was a trick question. Neither Charu or I ever had a conversation with Dad in our lives that didn't end with "Beta, I love you," a gift he gave us that we pass on to Isha, Ishan, and Ria. On less than a handful of occasions when I was truly out of line, he would say, "Raghav, I'll give you one tight slap." Then he'd pull me close and give me a hug and tell me that he loved me. It was the most hollow threat of all time. But through it, he earned our respect, and I hope we didn't let him down. That one tight slap never came. But if you do see me not wearing this ring in the future, please know you have Dad's blessing and instructions to finally give me that long overdue one tight slap. In moments where we were frustrated him and went to Mom to complain about him, she would always remind us and say, "Raghav, Charu, 10 बार जन्म लोगे, 10 बार मरोगे, लेकिन ऐसा बाप नहीं मिलेगा जो तुमसे इतना प्यार करता है." You could live 10 lifetimes, but you'll never get a father who loves you as much as he does. When it was time to tell the family that we were having Ria, I knew Dad was going to be delighted to be a Babaji. But I must admit that given the fact that I was not married, I thought surely today, if only slightly, I've let him down. Excuse me. When he hugged me afterwards, I whispered in his ear, "I'm sorry." He said, astonished, "Sorry, for what? This is the best news you could ever give me." Pardon me. When Ria was born, like all fathers before me, I had a few epiphanies. One, I would likely never sleep again for the rest of my life. And number two, I would never love anyone as much or as deeply as I love Ria. I've got to be able to see to speak this, I think. Sorry, excuse me. The initial panic at these realizations was replaced in time when I realized that by letting me be his understudy, Daddy had given me the greatest gift a man could give his son. The chance to be even a fraction of loving a father as he had been to Charu and I. Yet he found a way to even outdo himself there as a Nanaji and a Babaji to Isha, Ishan, and Ria. Isha and Ishan, it was one of the most touching moments of my life to see you a few weeks ago lying with Nana in those last few hours saying thank you and goodbye, and I'll never forget it. It is now your job to tell every story and share every detail of who Babaji was to Ria as she grows up and can better understand how wonderful he was and how lucky she is that he shaped how we love in this family and what we stand for. There is some peace for us in knowing that Daddy will now finally be able to give this love to his first granddaughter from Sanjay and Charu, whose time on earth with us was so cruelly short, but I'm sure he's with her now. I don't know what trauma Dad suffered that prevented such a loving, sentimental man from ever crying in front of us. Charu and I never saw him cry, even once. And Mom only saw it once in almost 54 years with him, the night of Charu and Sanjay's wedding. Two were claimed to speak at the reception, and as Mom describes it, howling when they got home that night. When she asked him what was wrong, he said, "Hamari Charu ja rahi hai." Our Charu is going. Charu, the thought of losing you in the Indian sense of the word when a girl gets married is the only thing that ever broke him. Of all Dad's accomplishments, you are most definitely number one. How you've looked after and loved our family and parents, kept our community united and thriving. I always knew that if I fell short as a son, that you would be there to save me and go above and beyond for us. And for that, I'm convinced that Dad's duas are with you more than anyone. This next story pretty much fully encapsulates who my dad was. In 2009, Mummy, Daddy, Rekha Masi, Masaji, Santosh Mama and family, Shobha Mainji, and Bina Masi all took a trip to Egypt, the second half of which was a Nile River cruise. Now, as many of you know, I love those after 8 mints. You know, the small square ones that come in the mint chocolates that come in the black square packaging? Well, Dad could not believe his luck when every day in the minibar in their cabin on the cruise, he would see those small square black packets. He put them in a Ziploc bag and then would call the front desk and say, "Excuse me, but my wife and I have thoroughly enjoyed those black square packets. Could you please send 3 more?" Each day, with increasing amazement, the staff would drop off 3 more, and Dad would immediately put them in a Ziploc bag. This went on for a week. When Mum and Dad came to London afterwards, Dad, smiling from ear to ear, said, "Beta, I know you love these, and I want you to enjoy every last one of them." I said, "Thank you, Daddy, but what am I going to do with 37 condoms?" That week in the land of Egypt, amongst the hospitality and housekeeping crew on the River Nile, a legend was born. In 2014, I was asked to do a private corporate gig for Heineken at the Taj Hotel in Mumbai. I had requested that as part of my fee, they fly out Mummy and Daddy to Mumbai and get us a suite for a week at the Taj Hotel. One night around 3 a.m., I heard some messing with my bedroom door handle. They were trying to break into my room. I went into celebrity mode. I quickly called down to security and said, "God damn it, there's been a breach. Send someone immediately. I need help right away." It was too late. The intruder had made it into the room. I mustered every last bit of bravery in me and promptly hid under the covers and played dead. The intruder was getting closer and closer. I took a deep breath and grew a pair and thought, this is it. I have to do something drastic. So I peeked my head out from under the sheets, gingerly, and saw Dad standing right above me. I said, "What are you doing here? It's 3 a.m. He said, "Beta, I wanted to make sure you were tucked in." I was 35 years old. Excuse me, I want to make sure I do something. Our Canadian journey took us as a family from Sept-Îles, Quebec, to Newfoundland, to Toronto, where I hopped on board, and then onwards to Calgary with a pit stop in Fort McMurray. Prakash Uncle through Anjum so eloquently told us of Dad's professional accomplishments, so I won't be redundant. But I would also mention that Dad had 3 patents to his name, and he was very proud of that. Truthfully, the workplace was not always kind to Dad, and for all his amazing qualities, understanding work politics was certainly not one of them. When a couple of senior colleagues decided that they could pad their home office expenses and dropped every hint for Dad to do the same, Dad simply could not pick up what they were putting down. It went over his head. Instead, Dad proposed in writing that they all return money to the company that they didn't need to spend as he did. Needless to say, it did not go over too well, but that was Dad. He was a man who would give all he had freely, fully, without expecting anything in return. Hand on my heart, our Dad never told us a lie. Now, this is not the kind of preparation a young man needs for a career in show business, and it made adapting to it that much more difficult. But when I ask myself who I want to be, what my ethics are at my best, it's Dad. And though I didn't have the good fortune to inherit in the physical form his broad shoulders, I hope these shoulders will have the strength to carry on his legacy of kindness, decency, and honesty. I want to read you part of a letter that Dad wrote to me on the day I left Calgary to go study music. Music in England. Excuse me. From August 18th, 1999. My very dear Raghav, today is the day you are starting a new venture into a new career. I know you will be successful. I hope your stay with Mama and Mindji goes well. You should try being a little less messy. Raghav, you have chosen such a unique path that I'm sure it will require patience. But don't give up. I wish I could help you more. But please know that Mummy, Charu, and I are fully behind you, and we are all with you in every way. And if you ever feel like giving up, please call home. Then he wrote down our home phone number that we've had for the last 7 years. A few weeks ago, Dad came home, and he looked very weak. Mummy and I spent 2 hours trying to feed him coconut water by spoon. It was heart-wrenching. He couldn't speak. We begged him, "Daddy, can we do anything for you? Are you in any discomfort? Koi takleef hai? Please tell us." I gave him a pen and paper to write it down, a Sharpie. And just like 53 years ago at the hospital with Mum, this time unable to eat or speak anymore, and though it took 10 minutes for him to write it, he simply wrote down, "I am okay." Daddy left us 5 days later at 9:40 a.m. on November 15th. And despite the fact we all knew for some time now that his earthly body was no longer worthy of his soul, we are heartbroken. In the midst of the pain that day, in the hours after Dad's passing, no doubt watching us thanking Daddy for all he did for us and the love he gave us, my Satish Mausaji said something that was so beautiful, I must repeat it today, about what the measure of a truly successful parent's legacy should be. He said, "बहुत लोगों के घर में बहुत पैसा है, लेकिन बहुत कम लोगों के घर में इतना प्यार है." Lots of families have a lot of wealth, but very few families have this kind of love. Well, that was it. That was Dad's talent. He knew how to love. कि प्यार कैसे करते हैं. One of Dad's favorite television shows was MASH, and on an episode dedicated to the topic of fatherhood, Charles Winchester III looks at Alan Alda's character of Hawkeye Pierce and says lamentingly, "Pierce, where I have a father, you have a dad." How lucky were we, Charu? We had a dad. Ishan and Ria, you didn't have a grandfather, you had a Nanaji and a Babaji. I don't know if that really makes sense to everyone, but it sure does to us. And Mummy, you had it all. And I can confidently say to you today, 10 बार जन्म लोगी और 10 बार मरोगी, लेकिन आपको ऐसा कोई नहीं मिलने वाला जो तुमसे इतना प्यार करता था. That you could live 10 lifetimes, you're not going to find anybody that loved you as much as he did. Thank you, Daddy, infinitely. It was perfect. Daddy ended the letter he sent me in 1999 with this. Raghav, Mummy, Charu, and I love you, and we wish you every success on your journey. But most of all, we wish you happiness. Well, Daddy, that's all we now wish for you on your journey, happiness. So from Mummy, Charu, Sanjay, Isha, Ishan, Ria, and I, we hope that wherever you are, that you are happy. Ke jahan bhi ho, khush ho.